might as well get started. So again, thank you guys all for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to us talk about AI search and where it is going, and how we're kind of transitioning a little bit from your standard organic SEO over to AI emphasis search as well. So we are your hosts. My name is Caity Viren. I'm the Director of Marketing at Compoze Labs, and I also have Eric Carr on with me, who is our President and AI lead. We have both been very, very interested in this topic and done a lot of research and testing thus far, but as you all know, very likely going to continue to change and grow and evolve over the next couple of years as well. So we're excited to see where it goes. We are Compose Labs. I will give you just a brief overview of us here. I know a lot of you already know who we are, but we are an app dev, data engineering, and artificial intelligence company. So we can help out with any and all of the different facets of those different capabilities. So we'll uh, be able to talk through kind of how that applies, and how we utilize our focus there to apply that to SEO efforts and AEO and GEO efforts as well. So today, just to give you a brief agenda, we're going to kind of start through the legacy of SEO and how it started, a handful of years ago, and now the new search ecosystem that we're jumping into. Then Eric's going to kind of talk through some of the technical implications and implementation for AI findability within that same space. And then we'll do a talk through of how this is an adjustment to overall content strategy, how you can look at your measurements across that, and then some potential content optimizations to test out as well. And then we'll do a quick wrap up and Q&A depending on how much time we have left at the end of it too. So jumping right into this first section, wanted to kick off a quick poll. Let me find that. Launch that for you guys. So curious for those in attendance, if you've noticed changes in your website traffic patterns in the last 6 months. I'm assuming if you're in this webinar that you likely have noticed at least some changes that piqued your interest into what you need to be doing in order to adjust and make changes so that you're able to show up more consistently as we continue to go through this. But if you want to just answer that, that would be great. And we will continue on. I'll leave it up for just a little bit. But I wanted to start off with just a quick overview at some stats that we've found that are really relevant to where this is all going right now. More than 50% of consumers are already using AI-powered search, which is great. I know I use it on the daily, and it's definitely changed how I do my user buyer patterns as well. So not just me, but greater than 50% of consumers are doing that too. And then in turn, more than 69% of searches now result in 0 clicks. So people are going onto Google, they're getting that AI overview, and then instead of clicking through to a website, they are getting majority of the information that they need right then and there, and not needing to continue onward in that journey. Because of that, 20 to 50% of traffic is projected to be at risk. So if you have already seen that, that's why. But that's going to continue to change as we continue to, this changes and evolves as well. And then about $750 billion of consumer spend is expected to flow through AI-powered search by 2028, which is huge. That's a projection, but a huge projection. But overall, what this means is that traditional search is going to continue to be relevant. It's going to continue to be impactful, but it's going to shift in importance. More than likely, people are going to be a lot more informed when they go through their traditional search process right now, because they're going to have done a lot of their research in those earlier AI platforms, and having those conversations there. So ideally, when they then come to traditional search, they're more informed and they're further along in their funnel. They're further along in their purchase decision making, and they're ready to take action as opposed to do more of their research directly on your website. So just want to do a quick breakdown of what these different acronyms mean. SEO, obviously, everybody's heard of this. It's search engine optimization, and that would be where you're optimizing for traditional search engines. This has been where Google has been kind of king of for majority of the time, and a good chunk of our focus when we talk about SEO is on how we can optimize for Google's algorithms and how we can rank in their top 10 to be findable and have the highest chance of people clicking through and coming through to your website. Of note, and this stat will come up a decent amount as we're talking, but Google is still building their foundation for AI off of this. So 76% of AI citations are coming from their top 10 results. So still incredibly relevant and something to keep in your strategy and your plan and to focus on. And then moving into the AI side, AEO and GEO are the two terms that have kind of emerged from this. People are choosing to use them interchangeably, but they are slightly different. So I did want to call out what they are so that you have that for understanding. But people may and do use one and the other as the solitary term. But AEO being answer engine optimization, and then GEO being generative engine optimization. AEO is more so optimizing for chatbots, voice search, those featured snippets, and then GEO is optimizing to show up in the AI generated responses. So slightly different goals and objectives there. One being to become the featured answer, and the other to be the cited source that is within the actual AI. So lots of different acronyms. That's pretty common in marketing to have a good variety of acronyms to have to learn and reference often. But within that, search behavior is also changing drastically. So I wanted to call out three major ones that we're seeing and how the user journey is adjusting with these different platforms that people are able to use. Initially, when people went to search, it was really quick, short, quippy statements like best CRM software. And then you'd get your list of choices to choose from for which one is the most relevant for you to go to. Now people are giving a lot more conversational prompts in searches within these platforms. So instead of saying best CRM software, they would say, help me choose a CRM for my 50-person sales team that integrates with Slack and doesn't require extensive training. So they're giving a lot more information, which is then used to provide a much more comprehensive answer within those synthesis that they're giving within those platforms. We're also seeing a move from links to answers. So when people were searching before, they were going directly over to websites, but now they're getting the answer within these platforms as opposed to having to click. And then moving from one source to many. Google was and still does remain to be king, but people are diversifying the tools that they're using. So they might use ChatGPT for research. They might go to then Google for verification of that research. They might use Perplexity for other things too. So there are some major changes that need to be adjusted for in your overall content and just general strategy that you're using. Speaking of Google, since they are the king of all of this, like we keep saying, what are they thinking? What are they doing? How are they applying this within their ecosystem too? What they're saying so far, the general Google statement is that AI overviews are additive to search as opposed to replacing traditional results, which I put yet there in parentheses. We'll see how that goes. I think over the next year, it's going to be really interesting to see how much of search is lost due to these overviews. And we'll have to keep track of those stats and see how that changes. Their main focus still, though, with their big algorithm update back in April, May, is the focus on quality content, especially as more AI generated pieces, more fluffy, generic generated content pieces are, flooding the market. They have a strong emphasis and focus on their EEAT, which is experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So making sure they really want to make sure that your content that you're producing is hitting all of those key pieces and is truly relevant, helpful, original content. And then they're also providing user choice. So multiple search modes are available, and they're providing all of that for everybody and making sure that across your process of whatever you're doing, research, informational, that you are able to utilize a Google product. What they're doing and what we're seeing, I thought this was really interesting. About 59% of informational searches and only 19% of commercial searches right now are triggering their AI overview. So if you're doing research or you're looking for information to learn rather than to purchase or make a decision, the odds are that the AI overview is going to show up for you a lot more frequently than if you're at that end stage, which is interesting. They're also testing AI mode as an opt-in experience. As mentioned, they're utilizing top organic results to fuel those AI overviews and then incorporating AI tools into their greater suite of products as well. If you utilize Google for a lot of things, you've likely seen that. I know we use slides and sheets all the time, and I use the AI features within that quite often. Really helpful. But overall, the reality for them is that they're trying to protect their search revenue because they do have money in the game for search ads, things like that, while also adapting to the AI disruption. So it's an interesting one to track, and we'll keep an eye on what Google does in the future and how they adjust to this as well, with a specific focus on search ads and things along those framework. Another interesting stat that I wanted to call out around traditional search and how that has evolved as these AI tools have been launching. This is a report that was done by Datos and SparkToro that started in, keeping a look at how these tools are being used in standard households across the last 3-ish years. And as you can see, traditional search, the amount of people that have been using traditional search tools like Google, Bing, Yahoo, all of those, has stayed relatively flat. So we haven't seen a decline in that very much. It's, dabbled between 96 to 94% consistently through that time. Whereas AI tools, ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, have grown pretty drastically across that time. So it was 8% in January of 2023, and now it's up to 38% as of June, which I'm assuming that number has grown since then as well. So this isn't a complete throwaway of all of the old tactics and strategy that you had around traditional search and SEO. It's more so how do we identify and prioritize which of these new efforts we want to be focusing on, as well as our old efforts that we were doing that were working really well. So why does this matter, especially for B2B? Already, 45% of B2B buyers are using AI tools in their purchasing decisions. But with that, there's actually a 62% disagreement rate across AI platforms. So depending on which one they're using and how they're doing this research to make their decision, they aren't getting the same answers. So for us, that means our best product, our best service might be completely invisible to them depending on which tool that they are using. We don't want that to happen, but also everybody can only optimize and adjust for each one so much, which point of that being all of these different platforms do have their own way of pulling in information, and then the answer that they give you is different dependent on that. So I did a little study here going across Google search, getting the AI overview, ChatGPT and Gemini, and I asked all of them the same question, which was, what restaurant has the best burger in Minneapolis, Minnesota? This is an important question for me, and I know that a lot of people in Minneapolis have a very strong opinion on which one that is. But as you can see, the Google AI overview gave me Matt's Bar and 5-8 Club, which are the, potential homes of the Juicy Lucy. Which one is the actual one is left up to your own determination. And then Parlor and Red Cow, whereas ChatGPT gave me Matt's Bar and Gemini gave me Parlor, Bullshorn, and Red Cow. So across all of these, that exact same question did provide a different answer. So making sure that you know that and adjusting your strategy thus is going to be really important as we continue on. With that, I will hand it over to Eric to talk through the technical implementation of AI.
Thanks. And similar, if people would want to just kind of answer this poll, so they just really kind of curious before we kind of dig into some of the technical details around how these new AI platforms are actually performing the underlying search. Just want to give a few seconds if people can answer the survey and just be interested in what people are doing today. Great. So I think if people have kind of heard me talk, I really like kind of taking into consideration a historical context, especially as we think about change and a lot of the innovations going on. So this whole general area of web search has really been evolving since the beginning of the web. And I think just keeping that in mind is really critical as we're both thinking about how our strategies are changing, as well as where it is going. So hopefully some of the material that I'll cover in this section will really kind of pull back the cover and really kind of give some of the details around how some of these AI algorithms are actually working. Now, obviously, they're going to continue to evolve. They're going to continue to tune them specifically for their users' results. So they are really looking at how do they best provide the right context, the right information to their users, and ideally kind of reinforcing some of the topics that Caity kind of teed up as part of in the first section, and also secondary leading into the third section where Caity will give a little bit more actionable results. So just at a high level, we'll kind of go a little bit into detail around this. I think Yahoo was probably one of the earlier human curated directories. So if folks were on the internet at that point in time, really just had individuals kind of looking for the best content. It was very much a manual process. There was some element of kind of reputation involved, but really that really shifted pretty significantly with the introduction of Google PageRank. That's PageRank is really Google's algorithm for really determining the link authority, so how different websites are referring to each other as a mechanism of really identifying which is the most valuable content or which is the most authoritative content on the internet. And since that point, there's been a lot of optimizations. As Caity mentioned, Google has continued to tune their algorithms. They've really continued. It's kind of been a little bit of a cat and mouse game with a lot of the content providers to really try to provide the best experience while also limiting, the spam, the content verboseness that some algorithmic kind of changes have really motivated. And now we're kind of into this AI era. So just the next few slides, we'll really kind of quickly go through some of these and hopefully give people an appreciation of the changes. So yeah, I felt this was kind of fun. If people were not around, or were in those early Yahoo days, the slide on the left hand side is from Yahoo when they were still at Stanford, and as you can see, it was this was the web circa 1994, was a list of sites, and it was really organized by category. And a short 5 years later, on the right hand side is really how Yahoo evolved, and it really was very categorical. Like there was a search button, but really it was very much more oriented around kind of curated content for individuals. And I think the next slide was really, this is really where I think we still remain, like in this kind of search centric way of interacting with our web content. I think part of that was from a technology standpoint, but also part of it was just the pure explosion of the information that's available on the internet. So I think Google, with their tagline, organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, was very much oriented around just how quickly the internet exploded and being able to give people a way of kind of searching and finding credible sources for information. And the right hand side, just as I mentioned, PageRank very, very simply is kind of really looking at kind of the interconnectivity of what websites are referring to which, and really in some ways there's like kind of these syncs that exist that have more or less kind of referral traffic, and really a lot of that underlying initial Google PageRank algorithm was fundamentally based upon that, and really kind of extended beyond that. So the next slide kind of goes into at least some of these transitions that we've seen on the search side. So I won't go into each one of those, but I think one of the main points of kind of highlighting these different shifts is really Google has continued to try to stay at the forefront of providing kind of fresh results, really trying to understand how both kind of users' search behaviors have changed, as well as in some cases even driving that. So I think it's very important to keep in mind as they've introduced AI summary as well as AI mode, they generally had been at the forefront of really kind of pushing how people try to find information, and then secondarily, how do content providers, how do folks like ourselves respond to that? So I also wanted to highlight there's probably like been three major pivots. I mentioned PageRank, in the 1998 timeframe was really kind of fundamental to kind of setting us on this journey. There was some pretty significant changes. I think most people in that 2011 to 2013, there were pretty large changes that Google implemented to really try to optimize quality as well as kind of crack down on anti-spam. That was a very, very clear period where people really need to significantly adjust their SEO strategies to be able to kind of continue to have the type of performance they wanted. There are a lot of other kind of capabilities, so like semantic search, which is something that's really overlapping quite heavily with a lot of the AI stuff, was introduced in the early 2010s. Mobile was a huge trend in the 2010s as well, with the introduction of both Android, iOS, and a number of more optimized smartphones. And then I think there's continued to be these things, and especially over the last 5 years, there's been really a specific focus on trust and authenticity. And I think that very much leads into what we're seeing how these various organizations are trying to kind of reposition that for specifically AI. So AI obviously gives us a really, really great capability of interacting in more kind of a semantic context in terms of what people are looking for, but also it does create a lot of risks for anti-abuse. So it makes it a lot more easy to generate a lot of spam content. And how do you go manage that? So all to say is, I think Google will continue to evolve. They'll continue to focus on how do they provide the best user experience, which will allow them to monetize those eyeballs as effectively as possible. And then from a content provider standpoint, really thinking about how do you provide trust and authenticity to the data that you have available to you. So the next slide, wanted to dig a little bit into kind of the black box that is how large language models operate, as well as how that data actually kind of can potentially surface as part of someone interacting with like a chat bot or some other API service. And there's really kind of three different phases. The first is really around base training data. And I think why that's very important is as we look back at really 2023 and part of 2024, a lot of the models and a lot of the reason why we saw, say, like hallucinations was that basically a lot of the data that was surfaced as part of interacting with these large language models was fundamentally based upon the base training data. So there's a lot of just kind of scraping the internet, analyzing the data at one point in time and really leveraging that. We've seen kind of an evolution, especially over the last 2 years, of kind of adding on additional specialized data sets. So as a lot of these large language models have focused on the medical space, legal, even potentially more like kind of specialized areas, there's been kind of this process of like training these new data sets into the models and really having them have some base awareness of these different areas. And really, what I think has been mainly the biggest game changer from a AI search or web search has really been the addition of tools and retrieval augmented generation. I won't spend too much time talking about RAG, but really enabling these large language models to actually call out to search services and really synthesizing those results has really been the game changer and why we're getting this very different kind of search behavior on AI versus like kind of the models and the way that they responded in like the early 2023, 2024 time period. So kind of the next slide, just digging into that level one. So, really the way that a lot of these large language models started out was kind of mainly scraping a bunch of data from the internet. So these huge text corpuses, mainly just kind of web data, and really analyzing it and training the models. So what the main thing to keep in mind is like the facts that were available to these large language models was really specifically a point in time. The other thing is, and really why there were probably a lot more publicity around hallucinations probably like a year or two ago. It's obviously still something that's out there, but really because a lot of the data was fundamentally based upon the data that was available to the large language model when it was actually being trained. So the next slide goes into a little bit of detail. I know it goes into a little bit more table dates, but really it's something that I do think it's very important to think about or be aware of, that a lot of these models have a knowledge cutoff date. So on the bottom left-hand side kind of indicates some of the latest models from OpenAI. Those were actually trained based upon data from mid to late 2024. So at least purely at a base data that's being used for the just pure model training. So without the access to tools, these models are not going to have information. So ChatGPT 5 will not have information available past October 1st, 2024. And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind, because these base models, a lot of behaviors were somewhat kind of interesting because of these cutoff dates. And you can see Google like in January of 2025, Anthropic a little bit sooner, so March of 2025. But this is always going to be a moving target. So all to say is, number one is really a lot of the initial large language models were very, very heavily reliant upon these kind of knowledge cutoff dates. And that's why we saw a lot of weird behavior, like say before the recent presidential election, OpenAI's models was not aware of for the winner just because of these training dates. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The next slide kind of goes into kind of more of those specialized training data sets. I won't spend as much time on this, but I think it's important to be aware. A lot of the large language models, because of the lack of data, they've been generating a lot more synthesized or synthetic data to be able to kind of train the models for more specific use cases. And secondarily, they are kind of optimizing for like kind of some specific cases. So like scientific articles is one area that there's a lot of work being done. Coding is another area where large language models are being used very heavily. But I think it's very important to keep in mind that there's these additional capabilities that are being augmented as part of the fine tuning, as part of the training processes. A lot of these models above and beyond kind of that initial wave of just kind of the raw text from the internet. And then the next slide is just really getting into kind of where we're at today and why there's been this really game-changing behavior in the way that what these large language models are able to do when people are search interacting with them. So really looking back at last year, 2024, Google released their AI summaries probably like mid-year. ChatGPT did a number of kind of experiments with Bing over the year, but really October, November-ish of last year was really when we began to see a lot more deep web integration, web search integration into these tools. So prior to that period, a lot of the data, a lot of the responses that you would get from a lot of these chatbots would be very much predicated on the training data that was available. So you got a lot more variable results. Whereas now we're beginning to see these models behave a lot more similarly to how you would imagine searching at one of these main chat services and like the types of results you're getting back. The other thing I think that's very important to keep in mind is that ChatGPT, if you're really specifically looking at optimizing for ChatGPT, they remain very much very dependent upon Bing. So a lot of the search results that they have coming back as part of the ChatGPT experience is really fundamentally predicated or grounded on kind of Bing and the way that Bing handles SEO. So I know a lot, we'll get a little bit more into kind of some of the specifics, but a lot of people have been mainly focused on kind of optimizing for the way that Google's SEO algorithms work. As we see ChatGPT, get over 1 billion users on a weekly basis, as well as the traffic from ChatGPT continues to grow from folks' websites, integrating or understanding how Bing actually is doing that search process is going to become more important. Another element that I think is really important. Oh, sorry, Caity, just one more point on this slide. On the far right-hand side, I think what's becoming more and more challenging is that there's a lot of different models out there. So OpenAI has their GPT-5. They have a variety of in GPT-5 Instant, there's a thinking model, there's a pro model. The variability of those models, each one of them is going to be using search in a different way. So specifically, a lot of your instant scenarios are probably most likely just going to go out, make kind of one call, probably get a top 10 result back, and then basically get a synthesis. You'll get a synthesis back of those results. But a lot of these thinking models, a lot of these more advanced models are actually potentially doing a fan out. They're doing multiple queries. So it becomes a lot more challenging as people are beginning to use some of these more reasoning, more advanced models to think about how do you go optimize for that? Because you're not really thinking about just a one search request. You're basically getting a fan out and they're basically synthesizing those results together. And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind. And the next slide really kind of gets into those steps. So, as you think about what is going on behind the scenes to actually surface a search result from some of these AI services, there's kind of like 4 fundamental steps. And some of them are very, very similar to what happens today with search. But, there are some nuances that I think are really critical to keep in mind. And there's really, I think, leading into kind of the, Caity's next section, there's kind of really 2 key kind of control points that people have from a content optimization standpoint to focus on that. So step 1, query interpretation. So as Caity mentioned, a lot of the queries that are going into these search agents are a lot longer. And if there's a longer query, there's a much higher probability that you're going to go to an AI summary versus just kind of going back to the traditional kind of like few keywords search experience that Google has provided. But most of these large language models are kind of interpreting the query, trying to understand what's some of the intent, and then potentially even breaking it into subqueries. So there's kind of this first step that I think is very important to keep in mind. So as you're optimizing your questions for to generate the right and create the answers for that, really understanding that there is this initial step, that there is some processing there. The second step is really, really fundamentally very similar to what happens with search today. So it's really, potentially sending one or multiple searches, as I mentioned, to multiple sources and getting back an authoritative list of potential content to use. So this is, I think, again, very similar to what happens with SEO today, but I do think a key difference is potentially you're leveraging multiple ways of searching, multiple indexes. So it's not necessarily just purely optimizing for one source. The step three really kind of takes back, say, like the top 10, the top 20 results, and really kind of synthesizes them. So basically, how do you go leverage these models, try to leverage the data that's available to them to kind of formulate a response? And that's basically what kind of gets served back to users. And then the fourth step is really kind of, in finalizing that. So after there's kind of this set of data that's made available to the large language model, how does it most effectively answer a user's question? And that's really where, the answer formation, the citation, it's very important not only to be part of that top 10 list as part of the information retrieval, but also secondarily, how do you go optimize your content for like content clarity, factual density, kind of this answer shaped format is something that's becoming more and more popular, because in this step four, the large language models are going to bias themselves in terms of leveraging information that is structured that way, because it makes it a lot more palatable for them to kind of use that in formulating a response back to a user. So hopefully those kind of four steps help. And then there's really two key points that are important. So kind of looking at, this is just a selective sample. There are other AI services, search providers out there, but just starting with Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Perplexity are probably four of the top. I think there's X out there. There's a few other ones, Grok, that are viable, but really wanted to kind of dig into what each one of them are doing and how they're doing it. So the second column is really showing some of the different types of capabilities or kind of product offering experiences that are being offered. So, Google, as we've mentioned, is, doing this AI overview. So AIO is something that you'll most likely see come up more and more. AI mode still, I would say, is a little bit more experimental, but it is something to keep in mind. So as users potentially begin to use that for more advanced, research queries, that's a scenario. And then I won't go through the other ones, but OpenAI, Anthropic, and Perplexity all have kind of very comparable kind of web search type of capabilities that are baked within kind of their current models. And the rightmost column really, I think, is important to keep in mind as you're looking at your traffic to your website. There are a variety of different potentially new bots that are kind of would be showing up. So Google's probably a little bit more similar to what they've traditionally done. So there's like a Google extended format that you're able to kind of manage access or granting access to content from a Google standpoint. A lot of Google's kind of foundation from a search capabilities from the Google Knowledge Graph. So that's something that I think people have somewhat of a familiarity with, because that's really what SEO has historically been optimized around. And then I think it's also very important to note that Google is leaning very, very heavily on their user-generated content. So like the YouTube properties, a lot of their mapping properties, that's information that they're leveraging very, very heavily for kind of answering questions that folks are asking and getting answers back on the Google on the AI side. Won't spend as much time on the other ones, but I think just maybe OpenAI just quickly, as I mentioned, they're very heavily like their number, at least the belief today is Bing is their number one kind of search source. There is a OpenAI kind of search bot that is been observed kind of scraping, analyzing a lot of folks' websites. So there's potentially the probability that OpenAI is kind of building on their own search indexes. They also have done very specific publisher licensing deals. So it's another mechanism of basically getting your content higher prioritized to be taken into consideration. And then also many of these these foundation model builders have these kind of training bots. So like GPT bot is a bot that's kind of scraping people's websites, and that's primarily more for that training data set So it's not necessarily today, at least, or publicly known to be used for the actual kind of searching. So I won't go through Anthropic and Perplexity or Anthropic. I think it's very similar to OpenAI. I just would kind of highlight a little bit on Perplexity because I know in specific kind of domains, Perplexity is very, very popular, especially in the enterprise space. They initially used Bing pretty heavily, but they have over the last probably 2 years, they have focused on building up their own indexes. So they have a Perplexity bot that's really doing the indexing, and I think they've gotten into a little bit of trouble in the marketplace, or a lot of trouble, because like kind of those traditional robot.txt files are being ignored. There is a different user query for like Perplexity users. So the user is actually triggering a request. They are surfacing that different to an individual's website. So that is something to be tracked. So like what amount of Perplexity bot versus Perplexity user traffic you're seeing. And they're also kind of doing some things on the content revenue side, sharing side. So all to say, I think hopefully this gives kind of at least some of a foundation. So as you're digging into some of the traffic sources and what is actually happening from a bot behavior standpoint, give you a little bit better sense of like what is actually going on behind the scenes, and then how potentially some of that kind of bot scraping traffic gets rolled up into your the search results on the main sources. And then just kind of closing out, wanted to just kind of highlight, I think where the current state. Now, obviously, this is going to continue to evolve, but as people are searching with these different services, where is the data coming from? And I think Google AI Overview, it's roughly around 30% of all searches of today. So obviously, that's been increasing over the last year and a half since the service release, and most likely will continue to expand. In general, most of the preferred sources are very much kind of these user generated, kind of like websites, like the Reddits, the YouTubes, the Quoras, the LinkedIn's. This is somewhat of a prioritized ranking, but generally Reddit, almost across the board, remains a very, very heavily leveraged content source for kind of a lot of the results, the answer results that are coming back. What also is interesting is kind of some comparisons around, the overlap with the Google or the Bing top 10. And I think if you look at, say, like Google versus OpenAI, Google obviously has a very high overlap. 76% of the results returned are in the kind of the Google top 10 if you had just purely done a web search. In the case of OpenAI, it's very, very low. So they really have around 10% overlap with Google top 10, but they have an 80% overlap with the Bing top 10. So as you're thinking about, like, say, optimizing an OpenAI, like AEO or GEO strategy, really thinking about how Bing behaves is going to be a lot more critical for you to optimize for ChatGPT traffic versus Google. And also just like quickly highlighting Perplexity, as I mentioned on the prior slide, they're really kind of building their own search engine from a content source standpoint, like Reddit, YouTube, community platforms. They have very, very similar preferred sources. However, Perplexity is going to potentially require a very different type of AEO, GEO optimization. Because at least today, if you do optimize for Google, if you optimize for Bing, you're not necessarily going to be getting the same results in Perplexity. So Perplexity is maybe a little bit more of a to be determined in terms of as they're tuning their algorithms. And then I think the reality is Anthropic really just does not have the traffic out there to really determine that. So it's relatively early on. I think by most indications, I think I missed it on the last slide. Brave is another search provider. So they're using a third-party search provider for their search results, so not really leveraging Google and Bing. There's yet another kind of SEO, GEO, AEO player in the mix that you would need to think about optimizing for.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. All right, back over to me as we're going to talk about, quick as we wrap up here, strategy, measurement, and then some potential content optimization tactics to test out. So one final poll here that we'll launch for you guys, asking just what's your biggest challenge with AI search optimization that you've had thus far? And I'll leave that up for a little bit for y'all to answer, but I'm going to jump through so we can get through all this content. All right, starting off with just measurement challenges that we're seeing so far as stepping outside of just straight Google Analytics from a search perspective and Search Console and needing to look into other avenues to explore what these potential benchmarks are going to look like. This is just a screenshot from a ever-growing list of some of the tools that are available right now. And this is going to continue to grow, evolve, and change, and in my opinion, become more helpful. There are some limitations that we see within these platforms right now and what they're actually able to report upon. So just to give you a look at that, some things that we can actively measure right now. You can see AI referral traffic in Google Analytics. You can see AI appearance impressions in Search Console. And if you have any access to any of these other tools, we use SEMrush, for example. You can see citation frequency, brand mention sentiment, things along those lines that are much more AEO, GEO focused. What we're not able to measure yet, as you could likely see within a lot of these AEO features, in that middle column there, is things like comprehensive cross-platform visibility, which AI is answering what about your brand, the attribution for those influence conversations, and then what amount of lost traffic you're seeing from those zero-click searches. So it's interesting the information that it's able to provide right now. I think it gives a brief look into how these different adjustments are becoming successful and how you can start to monitor and keep track of them. But what a lot of them are missing is it gives you some of these results, but it doesn't actually show you, okay, this is what this is doing. Now, what do you do next? Where I feel like a lot of the OG SEO platforms are able to provide some really helpful next step actions that you can take. We're not quite there yet with any of these platforms. So, but I think it will get there for sure. It's just going to take a little bit of time to develop that as everyone is learning and seeing where this is going to go. As we look into, the KPIs that you're tracking across this too, it's going to change and evolve as well. So within the traditional SEO space, we're likely keeping track of overall traffic volume, your keyword rankings, click-through rates, time on site, things like that. Whereas now it's going to move over more so to citation frequency, share of voice, brand sentiment, and then AI referral conversion. And I want to emphasize that one just a little bit because as we're, hitting on traffic drops and things along those lines, we are seeing a much higher conversion from AI traffic versus organic or traditional search traffic. And odds are that's because people are coming to your site a lot more ready to convert because they've done a lot of their research beforehand. So if you're keeping benchmarks on a lot of these stats, you're then able to identify, okay, we're seeing a dip here, but we're seeing an increase here. And keeping track of that is going to be really impactful as you test out some of these tactics that we'll be talking about. Before I dive into some content framework, I did want to just hit on this, which is something that Eric kind of talked about too. But 15 years ago, as SEO became a lot more relevant, we did see a lot of people trying to kind of game the system by keyword stuffing and utilizing low cost written content, link farming, all of those kinds of things. And while that might have worked in the short term and maybe they ranked for a little bit, obviously the companies are smart and they update their algorithms to adjust for that. And at the end of the day, it ended up not helping them. It hurt them, even though they might have ranked initially. So I want to put that out there just as I think we're kind of in a little bit of that era right now with AI search and people are testing a lot of things. And if they find something that works, they might be, trying to game it a little bit. But the big focus with all content in any space is always just to make sure that what you're producing is valuable and of interest to the audience that you're producing it for. So I'm going to talk to you about a handful of different things, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure that the content you're producing is relevant, original, and helpful to your audience. And that's where that expertise, experience, authority, trust, that piece comes into the puzzle too. And as we go forward, I mean, structure and all of the way that you're setting up your content is also going to be relevant, but the true message is the key piece. We'll go through this really quick because I know we're just about at time. From a traditional SEO standpoint, the user path that they took was asking a question, Google finding the page, and user clicks, and then they read the answer. But where we're going from an AI search perspective is changing that up quite a bit. So if we use this example question that I have here about what's the best CRM, within AI, the user might ask, what's the best CRM? AI then breaks that up into 20 sub questions, which could be what is a CRM, types of CRM systems, CRM pricing models, a handful of different questions, which it then searches all of them, synthesizes that answer, and gives it to you to read. So while you're reading the answer, odds are at no point in that process are you actually clicking on any links to take you outside of the AI platform that you're in right then. So a little bit different. And as we're optimizing then for that AI approach, there's a couple different things we could do from our content strategy perspective, which is one, anticipate that query fan out. So how is this process going to go? Is it best CRM, define CRM, list your options, compare features, discuss pricing, follow that kind of process. and then structuring your content for the extraction. So utilizing quick opening summaries, bullet points, comparison tables, clear section headers, FAQs, Q&As, things like that. Make it really easy for your content to be extracted from. And then providing verifiable evidence. I think this is a key one that goes untalked about at times. A lot of times, if you're, using just straight AI to produce content, it could pull irrelevant sources, it can pull inaccurate sources. So making sure that you are putting in your own date statistics, citations, things like those lines are going to make sure that your content is better optimized and more readily to be used for these different systems. Content formats to test. I'll go through this super quickly. These are just a handful of ones that I think are going to be really relevant. You may already be doing them from your, traditional search perspective, but hitting heavy on those first two with the original research and data-driven content, and then expert insights and quotes. Making sure that the content that you're producing has pieces that only you could provide within it is going to be pertinent as we move forward through this content development process. There's also step-by-step how-to guides, listicles, best ofs, FAQs, checklists, things along those lines are going to continue to be helpful, relevant types of content that you could produce. Outside of the content that you're actually producing for yourself, a really key component of your strategy is going to need to be offsite optimization. So this is where, different citation, mention, links that all contribute to your domain and topic authority are being pulled from. And they're super useful for LLMs and AI search when they're deciding which source to reference and the answer to give. And they're also helpful because it's just additional touch points where your audience can discover you outside of your own website. This is, I think, a great way of speaking to trust again, to build trust. Reading an answer about a company that comes from somebody who's used them is always, a little bit more impactful than content about the company talking about themselves from a trust perspective. So I want to hit heavy on this just because I think this isn't one that we think about as often in a content generation perspective, but super impactful and is going to be really important to be a key part of your strategy moving forward. Some strategies to consider for this: Reddit, as Eric had mentioned, YouTube, making sure you have a process for producing videos, including transcripts, guest posting, industry forums, having a PR strategy, things along those lines are going to be impactful. I won't go through all of this, but I can send, screenshots of it in the email post. This is just some key focus areas for those main platforms. So AI overviews, ChatGPT, and we have Perplexity and Claude with different tactics and focuses that you can look to based on those different, the fact that Google AI overviews uses Google's top 10 and the fact that ChatGPT uses Bing is going to be all included in here. But to get to our kind of quick wrap up and next steps, what we know versus what we've learned, what's proven, we know zero-click searches are up. We know AI overview reduces CTR by 34.5%. We know that AI traffic converts higher than organic. We also know there's multiple platforms and multiple strategies that you need to be thinking about and where you want to actively spend your time. I don't think that anybody is going to be able to have a true, tried and true strategy for each of these platforms initially. I think it makes sense to key and focus in on the ones where your audience is using the most. Maybe you poll them and ask, like, which of these tools are you actively using as a way to find which one you identify to focus your strategy on first. And then authority matters more than ever too. Building out your brand trust and authority is going to continue to be important. And then the great list of what's evolving, I think I could probably have added 20 more things to this list, but best practices are changing, platform behaviors are in flux, AI browsers are being launched, which is another thing we really didn't touch base on here, but could be a whole nother webinar. Value of web traffic is different, measurement standards are developing, long-term impacts are unclear. And then another piece, the monetization models are emerging. How advertising is going to impact this is going to be a whole nother game changer. So last thing I'll leave you guys with, action that you can take now, just a quick 3-month potential plan that you could implement. Not to say that all of these should be, but some places to start. A quick audit of your top 10 pages on your website, making sure you get your, reporting dashboards, measurement systems set up in place, doing another quick audit of your presence in places like Reddit or industry forums, or getting your YouTube channel set up and ready for new content on there. And then I think the key piece of this is just experimentation. So utilizing these new formulas, can you rewrite a couple of pages? Can you create new pages? Can you find those subreddits and publish a couple of helpful answers within them? I think getting a video strategy in place and producing new content there is going to be impactful as well. And then optimizing. So finding what worked well, finding what didn't work well, just as important, and then using that information to scale your efforts from there. So, overall, I think this is all being developed and established right now. There's a lot of unknowns still as to what this is really going to look like in the next couple of months, the next year. But really, I think understanding where we're at and taking that into account and trying things is going to be the key component to success across the future.